Yeah, this is a lovely webinar by Anestin Lum Chi from Cameroon. She is, as you can see here, a multiple award-winning language teacher and teacher educator from the French-speaking side of Cameroon. She is passionate about innovative teaching methodologies and teaches continuous professional development. Her research interests include pre- and in-service teacher training, and you're going to see some of her research, her action research, and the effect it's had on her classrooms in this webinar. Over to you, Anestin.
Thank you so much, Linda. Welcome, distinguished colleagues. I'm Anestin Chi, and today we are looking at how to teach grammar communicatively with a focus on the situational approach. Our hope is that by the end of this webinar, we would have learned about the situational approach. We would also have explored strategies and techniques for making grammar instruction more engaging and while taking into account meaning, use, and form. So in this webinar, we'll begin by looking at our context. Thereafter, we will discuss why we think learners face challenges with grammar lessons. Then we'll move on to explore teaching ideas related to the situational approach. And we will pay particular attention to techniques of building context for language structures. Thereafter, I will share with you some examples from my personal teaching. And at the end, we will explore the benefits of the situational approach in the teaching of grammar. So let's get started, please. Increasingly, grammar is considered an important skill that helps learners to master English fully. Consequently, we, teachers of English to speakers of other languages, tend to focus so much on grammar, which we associate with the mastery of the rules of the language. The emphasis on the rules, which entails rote memorization with little or no communicative practice, is partly due to our teacher training, and at times to the structure of our national curriculum, and even the English language paper at national certification examinations in contexts like mine, wherein learners are given mechanical exercises and asked to produce random sentences. Permit me share with you, dear colleagues, a screenshot of an examination paper. This is for terminal. It's actually a baccalaureate paper. And you can see the screenshot of the grammar section. You see learners are asked to rewrite sentences in reported speech or in the passive voice. For them to be able to do this, they need to master the mechanics of the language. And because of this, we teachers fall into the temptation of paying attention to these mechanics more than to context meaning. Although there has been a shift towards communicative language teaching in our curriculum, we still tend to struggle with building learners' communicative competence, especially when teaching grammar. Whereas the ability to communicate in the target language remains the ultimate goal of language learning. The biggest question for us this afternoon, therefore, is how do we, as teachers, make grammar instruction less challenging and more engaging for learners? How do we shift from the mechanics of the language and pay attention to meaning, use, and form? I'd like us to take some time to discuss our views, share our views, why we think our learners face difficulties with grammar lessons. Dear colleagues, I invite you to share your ideas from your experiences in the chat, and I'll be happy to read them out. Thank you. Great. Often teachers think grammar is difficult and they pass on the feeling to learners. Wonderful, nice idea. What are the reasons? Why do we think, beside passing on the feeling? Yes, someone says differences between the L1 and the target language. Great. Sometimes grammar is boring. Grammar learning is boring. I do agree. It can be repetitive, so practice and exercises can be boring. A lot of focus on rules, which are sometimes confusing, especially when it comes to exceptions. Great. Grammar rules are somehow complicated. I do agree. We do not master the rules ourselves, so we recite them. Yeah. Great contributions there. The rules are sometimes confusing. I do agree. Most of the learners face problem having to learn English as a second language. Great. And in some contexts, they even learn it as a third or fourth language. Someone says it's not taught. Direct translation from mother tongue or L1, wonderful. Difficulty in learning it in L2. Rules are difficult to memorize. There is interference. Something grammar lessons are a bit challenging. Great. Complexity of the rules and lack of practice. They find difficulties because they don't have to use it in real life. Great. Mastery has been minimal on the part of teachers as well, and there is also L1 interference. Wonderful. Really great ideas coming there, and I've seen rules, lack of practice coming on and on again. So this seems to really be a challenge for us. It's not just about the learners not being able to master the rules, but the teachers too. And I've also seen you make mention of root memorization. Great. Someone says teachers find difficulties explaining abstract rules. Wonderful ideas. Thank you so much. And of course, I do agree with you that these are a reality. Perhaps one of the ways of navigating these challenges is via the situational approach, which is the core of our presentation today. The majority of our course books and even our teaching materials deal with language in chunks. They present language items in isolation, as if they are bricks that learners need to learn and then struggle to merge the pieces together to form the block. Unfortunately, this is how we're taught to teach at the teacher training college for some of us. And this is how the materials that we use to teach are designed. So the situational approach offers a way of developing learners' awareness of language structure without falling into the temptation or the mechanical presentation of today, we are going to explore the present perfect continuous tense. That used to look typically like me. That used to be my story before I came across the situational approach. So proponents of the situational approach posit that language needs to be taught in context because context breeds meaning. And they say one way to illustrate meaning is via a situation, which could be real or imagined. So simply put, proponents of the situational approach think that all language structures should be introduced via real life situations. This way, students see the relevance of the grammatical structure via the context in which they are used. They can understand the meanings of these structures and use them outside the classroom to communicate. So they say to teach via the situational approach, we need to lay emphasis first on meaning, then on the form of the structure, and give room for learners to practice using these structures. Now, let's talk a bit about meaning. We need to build context slowly by guiding learners and keeping them involved. So create a context. And of course, we should talk about techniques of building context. Create a context for every language structure we need to teach. And we don't just need to create that context, we need to get learners involved in the creation of that context. A nice way of getting them involved is by eliciting from them. Do not just tell the learners, do not just give them the structure, but elicit as much as possible using proper questions to guide them towards having the structure. In as much as you are guiding the learners, have a model structure that you want the learners to produce, and so guide them towards producing that structure. And in the end, or at the end, if they are not able to produce the structure, then you can give it to them. So do not begin by giving away. Prompt them as much as you can to guide them towards the structure. So what are some of the ways through which we build context? One way is by using visuals. These could be pictures, it could be videos, it could be real objects that we bring into our classrooms. Another way is by narration, using storytelling techniques. Tell them a story that has the structure you intend to teach embedded in it, so they see the structure in context. Also get them involved through role plays. Involve them in building the context through role plays. So get them to do little sketches that, of course, will push them to use the structure, or at least point to the structure, language structure you intend to teach. So these are 3 techniques we could use to build context. Once we've developed context, we've built that context, then we can move on to paying attention to form and use. We need to drill the learners through the model structure. When we give them the model structure at the end of the context build-up, we need to drill them. So pronounce it and have them repeat, so they don't just listen, but they also pronounce. They learn how to say the structure. Once that is done, provide the learners with a written form. And of course, why provide the learners with a written form after the drilling? This is related to how we learn, how we grow. Look at a little child in your house, a baby. How do they learn? They learn by hearing first. So they hear why they don't speak and probably don't understand. They hear. Then they repeat. They start repeating the words they hear around them. That's how they pick up language. They hear papa, banana, and then they start repeating those words before they ever get to learn how to write banana. But of course, as they see the banana, they hear the word banana, they can relate to it. So if you bring the pictures, the visuals, tell the story, then they pick up the structure from that story, from those visuals. You drill them, they repeat. Before they see the form, they are just like the baby who is learning at home. Learning to hear the word papa, then learns how to say it before ever learning how to write it. Once you've provided them with a written form, because of course they need something to take home that will help them to revise, then ensure you check that they understand, that you did not guess that they understood. Don't guess. Check that they actually understand. And one nice way of doing so is via concept check questions. So concept check questions are very short questions that require answers such as yes or no. So if I take any structure like Anestin used to go to the gym. You could ask a concept check question like, does Anestin still go to the gym now? The learners, based on the sentence, learners will say no. Was she going in the past or in the present? In the past. So use concept check questions and even timeline. Was Anestin going in the past or in the present? Use that to check understanding and ensure that they actually understand and not just guess. Once we are done with form and use, then we can proceed to practice. Of course, I know we already do practice. We give gap fill exercises. And of course, I think one of the exercises we love in Cameroon is fill in the blanks. If you saw the screenshot I shared, you would have seen fill in the blanks at some point. I'm not saying that those kind of exercises are not good. They are good, of course, because you need to scaffold from those very simple close exercises to more challenging ones. It would be good that after they've done the close exercises, such as fill in the blanks, complete the sentences, it would be good that you give them room to use the structure naturally, using their own words. And so give them both controlled and freer practice exercises. So these are the stages of using the situational approach. I know one question that you have on your mind now is, Anestin has said all of these things, they're so beautiful, but all of this is theory. How do we put all of what Anestin is saying into practice? So I'd like to share with you in the second half of this webinar, my action research, you learning about and using the situational approach. I would like to say this action research was conducted at a rural government technical school. It's called ZIMI. So I mentioned it's a technical school. Learners enrolled in my school study either building construction, cloth designing, electrical technology, or motor mechanics. My average class size, 70 learners per class. They have French as medium of instruction. Now, what are my challenges? They speak French at school, and out of school, they speak their mother tongue. They have little or no exposure to English. And I mentioned that they are technical school students. If you come from Cameroon, you understand the language. Technical students say that God gives English. So they are not concerned, not just with English, but they are not even concerned with all the literary subjects that are not directly related to their specialisms. So what they are concerned with are their technical subjects. They are not even concerned with the literary subjects in French. And here you are bringing English, which to them, only God can endow one with the mastery of English. So I faced a lot of challenges teaching grammar lessons in particular. And I started reflecting. What was the problem? Was there something affecting learners' perception? And I came up with this set of questions that helped me to explore, to understand the situation better. So I organized focus group discussions, and I asked learners why they had difficulties with grammar lessons, what they disliked about grammar lessons, how they felt about it. And then personally, I reflected, after gathering data from the learners, I started reflecting on how can I be of help now that I know all that they've told me. How do I step in? And so that pushed me to do some reading. And that's how I landed on the situational approach. But I mentioned that I did speak to the learners. What did they tell me? They told me, they raised some of the challenges you already mentioned. They said grammar concepts were abstract. They also mentioned that it was difficult to memorize the rules, especially with the exceptions. And they mentioned that they didn't understand the context, the meaning, and the meanings of those grammar structures, and that's why they were unable to use them. So I did some reading, and I learned about the situational approach, and I decided to implement this in my classroom. I decided to use pictures, so visuals, to teach modals. So modals like should, shouldn't, should have, shouldn't have, to teach conditionals too. I use storytelling technique to teach the past perfect progressive tense. I use role plays, so I involved learners through sketches to teach reported speech. Here are some examples of what I did, concretely speaking. So in a grade 7 class, I was going to teach because I stopped getting into the classroom and mentioning that today we are going to do A, B, C. So I stopped that. I just get into the class with my context and I start building the context and instead of giving the title of the lesson. So in a grade 7 class, I use these pictures to teach giving advice using should and shouldn't. So in the picture to the left, I showed the first picture to the learners and I asked them, what do you think the ladies are doing? And they came up with very interesting ideas. But I love to hear your own ideas. What do you think the ladies in the picture could be doing? Please share your view in the chat. Great, wonderful. I see picnic, picnic. And of course, the children mentioned that the ladies were on a picnic. So I elicited from them what items they needed to go on a picnic. And the learners listed a number of items. So I will be asking you, what items would you need if you were going on a picnic? Great picnic basket, lots of food, wonderful. Food, water, music, umbrella, mat, snacks, excellent. And so the learners listed all of these. They listed even the type of clothing you needed to have on umbrellas. And then I showed them the second picture and said, this is the picture of my friend, Mary. She has come to my house to inform me that she's going on a picnic to Mount Phoebe. Look at the way she's dressed. Do you think she should go for the picnic? What would you tell her if you were in my place? What do you think the learner said? Let me hear from you. So, okay, someone says she might get sunburn. Yes, but if you were in my shoe, what will you tell Mary, my friend, if she walks up to you and says she's going going for a picnic, dressed the way she is? Great. She should dress in long sleeves. She should cover herself a bit. She should take water. Great. Wonderful. And so the learners came up with ideas like she should have boots instead of sandals. She should wear a pair of trousers. All the very lovely ideas you've put in the chat. And there was the structure. And while they were giving all these sentences, I was busy writing them on the board. Then I used the sentences to say which one is negative, which one is positive, because they also gave negative sentences. You shouldn't wear short sleeve. And so they identify when to use should and when to use should not or shouldn't. Still using the same picture, this time around in a grade 11 class, I thought the models should have and shouldn't have to express regrets. And in this class, I told a story. So I used the storytelling technique. I started by telling them, showing the first picture, asking, what do you think the ladies are doing? And they gave all the lovely answers you've given. They're on a picnic. What do they need for a picnic? They gave the items. So I elicited and got items. Then I told them the story using the second picture. Oh, sorry. Using the second picture. And my story was, this is Mary, my friend. She visited me on a Saturday and invited me to go for a picnic with her. Unfortunately, I had some things to do. My parents had given me some assignment to do. So I couldn't go with her. So Mary decided to go for the picnic alone. She got to Mount Phoebe, was enjoying herself until rain started falling. So Mary thought of rushing back home. And as she was going down the hill, she fell and hurt her ankle. She was carried to the hospital by some passerbys, good Samaritans, of course. And Mary spent a few days at the hospital. While she was there, I went to visit her. What do you think I told Mary? Or what do you think Mary told me when she saw me? Let me hear your views and see what you think Mary told me. She should have stayed at home instead. Great. Lovely. What do you think Mary told me, or what do you think I told Mary? What was the content of our conversation? I say she should have stayed at home. Wonderful. Now, look at the items that you've listed that are necessary for a picnic and think of what I would have told Mary. She should have worn a pair of boots. She should have listened to my advice. She should have considered the weather. Wonderful. Great ideas. And of course, my learners came up with some of these lovely ideas which you're sharing. And that was easy for me. I wrote a structure and used the sentences to teach the language structure. Great. Let's move on to another example. Here are a set of pictures I used to teach the present perfect continuous tense in a grade 11 class. In the past, I used to get into my classroom, rush to the board and write present perfect continuous tense. Before I turn, half of the class is gone. And when I ask them, they tell me, Madam, the title of that lesson, it was too difficult to comprehend. So I changed the strategy. I stopped writing titles of lessons. So in a grade 11 class, I showed the first picture to the learners. So the first picture to the left, to the learners, and I used a storytelling technique. So I told them on these pictures, I have, this is Patrick and Dogmo. They used to be very good friends at primary school. So they played together, they studied together, and then they took their common entrance examination together. This is the examination you need to take in grade 6 to have access to secondary school in Cameroon. And so in the second picture, you see them celebrating their success. And I did not just tell them, I showed them the second picture and say, what do you think? In the first picture, you saw them taking an exam. What do you think they're doing in the second picture? Oh, madam, they're celebrating their success. They've probably passed, they've gained admission. Good ideas. Now, I showed them the last two pictures. No, I told them a story before showing them the last two pictures. I said, Delmo and Patrick had planned to go to the same secondary school. But as fate will have it, the parents of Patrick were transferred to another city in Cameroon. And so they had to part ways. But 6 years after, they get to meet in a new city. So both parents have been transferred to a new city, and they get this, the students get to meet there again. And Dogmo had been at X school studying. Patrick is arriving in that city and has enrolled in that same school. He meets Dogmo on the first day, and he's so happy 6 years after. What do you think could be the content of their conversation? So I elicited from the learners. Let me hear from you what you think could be the context of their conversation. So think of some questions that Dogmo might have asked Patrick, or Patrick might have asked Dogmo. How have you been? Great. If they're in school, they're talking about the school. Okay, they ask probably what happened in between their separation. That's good. What have you been doing all day? Remember, I mentioned that Dogmo had been at that school and Patrick came and enrolled in the same school. So learners thought that one of the questions could be, how long have you been studying here? And I picked up that structure to teach the present perfect continuous tense. How long have you been studying here? And of course, we use concept check questions and timelines to check understanding. How long have you been studying here? Was Dogmo studying here in the past? Yes. Is he studying here in the present? Yes. Is there a possibility that Dogmo could still be studying here for a few months or years? Yes. So what tense do you use to describe an action that started in the past, is continuous in the present, and has the possibility of extending into the future? And of course, you want to guess. Leonard said the past present continuous tense, which is not a bad answer. And then I had to rephrase and say, when we talk of tenses, we talk of perfect instead of past. So it will be the perfect present, or the present perfect continuous tense instead of the past present continuous tense. And that's how we taught that structure. The learners had learned the structure in context even before they learned the title. But in the past, the title of the tense used to frighten them. And they were like, oh, madam, this looks quite easy. I thought that was a very difficult tense. One more example before we wrap up. So I extended the lesson to teach using since and for, which goes with this tense. And here also I told a story. I showed them the first picture and said, what do you think the lady in the picture is doing? Let me hear from you. What do you think the lady in the picture could be doing? Making a call, great, because we kind of see her holding a phone. Great, making a phone call. Then I showed them the second picture and I asked them, what do you think is the relationship between the girl in the picture who seems to be making a call to and the lady in the first picture? It could be her daughter. Great, wonderful. And these are some of the answers the learners came up with. So they imagine it could be her daughter. And for those of us who are in Cameroon, we kind of know this setting. So I asked them, where do you think these three persons in the picture could be? And they were quick to guess that it's a health center because it would look like a health center in Cameroon. So there is that kind of desk, And the nurses always have that white robe, white overall over their dresses. So they guessed she was at a health center. And so I told them, I asked them, why do you think the lady could be calling her daughter? And they started guessing. Why do you think she could be calling her daughter? Let me hear your own views.
Because it was getting late.
Great. Someone said, because it's getting late. So which means she has been there for a long time. And then I said, what answers do you think the girl could be giving her mother? And of course, they did not get it at the go. I had to probe, and eventually they got responses like, I have been waiting for the doctor since morning, since I came. The doctor hasn't arrived yet. I have been waiting for the doctor since morning. We have been waiting for 2 hours. And then we use those sentences to look at the difference between since and for, how to use them in context. And of course, I would have loved to go on and on with many examples, but I do acknowledge that time is not on our side and that you probably have so many questions. So I'd like to end here, but let me quickly mention that I know one thing that is running through your mind is Anestin, 70 students, and you're showing these 2 pictures. How do they visualize? In fact, more, because I used to have a class of 157 students. So how do they visualize? Of course, if I chest the picture, so if I just hold the picture in front, they're not going to see it. So I bring averagely 5 pictures to class, and I make use of the 4 walls of the classrooms. So I post the pictures, probably turn them on the vessel, and then I label them A, B, C in the order in which I want them to be turned. Then I put learners who are smart enough beside the pictures. So when I test picture A, the learners who are seated by the pictures or by the wall, they have to turn the picture that is close to them. And then those who are sitting around there can easily visualize. That also is helpful. And of course, I did use role play in teaching reported speech. I got my learners to role play a scene in which 2 were fighting, and then the others had to report to a discipline master, report the incident to a discipline master who was still their classmate. And while they were doing that, I was correcting the language they were using and writing the correct sentences on the board. And eventually we used that to teach reported speech. Instead of telling them when to rewrite a sentence from direct to reported speech, you change the verb tense, you change the pronoun. No, I simply told them, what did A initially say? Report it to the discipline master. And they tried to report. And of course, we adjust and pick the right language structure. So with all that I have told you, what in your opinion would you say are the benefits of the situational approach, if at all? Please share your views in the chat. Great. Understanding, enhances engagement. It makes the class participatory. Great. Learning is student-centered. It allows to teach language. Indeed, it makes learning real and concrete. Wonderful. Real life situation, the learners can relate to the real life situation. It makes learners engage, it increases learners' participation, everyone gets involved. It brings learning out of the abstract. Language is used naturally. Great. The learners are actively involved. It encourages participation. Wonderful. I did mention that what you saw was part of an action research and that I did have focus group discussions with my learners. So after using the situational approach, I asked them, what difference did it make? And this is what they had to say. They said there was less focus on the rules. They felt that learning, they felt involved in the learning, so it was student-centered. They enjoyed the context built up, so much so that at times they forgot that they were learning grammar. And they understood the meanings of the structures in context. And because the structures were used in context, they were able to translate that into their daily communication. So of course, it was an action research. I read to get to the situational approach. And after my action research, I decided to write an article too, which you can see on the list of the references. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Hello, Linda. I'm open to questions.
Yeah, there was one question earlier from Fozia in Ethiopia, and she said, how and where do the students get all the vocabulary they need from? So you're eliciting lots of ideas, but where do the learners get the vocabulary in the first place?
Great, wonderful, wonderful question. There is, when you are using pictures, learners can easily relate. And I think I did mention a couple of times that they did not get the answer on the go, and I needed to probe, and I sometimes even give away the structure. So you probe and then they don't get it, you give away the structure and then have them practice it. So they get the vocabulary by looking at the picture, they get the vocabulary via the probing. At times they get it from their classmate, or I give them the vocabulary. That's why they are so involved. So really an interesting question, and I hope I managed to answer.
I think you can probably use translation as well, though, can't you? If it's a country
Yes.
where English is not a first language, and this is a good opportunity, isn't it, for learners saying something in their language and then the teacher providing the language for them.
Great, wonderful, wonderful, Julia, Linda. That's really a nice idea. Yes, at times we use the other learners, we use their classmates to do the translation. So someone gives the word in French, and then we use another classmate to get them to say it in English. It's only when it's really challenging that the teacher steps in. I will step in to give the translation.
Yeah, there's another question here. Can you use this approach in a tertiary institution? What do you think about that?
Yes, I have used this approach. Yes, if they are foreign language learners, if they're learning English as a foreign language, which means maybe a third or fourth language, it's very possible to use because at times we do assume that at that level they should have mastered English. But the reality is different. They really do not master English. So it's still valid. And I think it's a nice way of engaging the learners, and people when people feel involved, then they pay close attention. They feel valued in the lesson, and they learn easily. I think so.
Yeah, it was actually Toyin who asked that question. I think they meant probably in a university. What do you think about using situational approach in a university?
Yeah, yes, and that's why I said if you're teaching in a context like mine, where English is still a foreign language and not a second language, because the tendency is we often assume that they should have had a mastery from secondary education. If you're teaching it as a second language, it might be different. They might have a good base, but if you're teaching it as foreign language, it's still very valid. Of course, even if you're not using visuals, you are using stories, storytelling technique. You are getting them involved. And so they feel part and parcel of the lesson. And I think when people are engaged, then they put in more effort to learn.
There's another question from Ayuka Bore. How do you manage the time in these situations?
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that question. And I know time is always an issue in our context. So I will use that time just as, instead of struggling with the learners to explain so much, because what I notice is I used to put in a lot of effort, a lot of time doing the explanation, trying to get the learners to understand the meaning. So now I reduce that explanation time and transfer it to the context building time. So I use more time to build the context because it helps them to understand better. So it will take me less effort and less time to explain and trying to get them to understand the structures.
Yeah, great. There's lots of questions here, lots of interaction. Lots of people are saying how great the webinar is. So thank you, Anestin. There's another question here saying the title is How to Teach Grammar Communicatively. This is a question from Tesfaye in Ethiopia. The situational approach is one way. What are the other criteria for an activity to make it communicative? I think this is quite a big question. I don't know if you want to go into that here.
Yeah, I think that's an ocean, quite vast. Of course, we mentioned that it's one approach, and there could be many other ways. But of course, what is interesting with the situational approach is that it kind of touches on many approaches, other approaches, because you find the use of visuals, the use of storytelling techniques, role play in most of those other approaches. So it kind of gives a lead into other approaches. But I do agree there are many, many approaches. We could spend the whole day trying to explore them here.
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? There's another question here from Ezin. With this approach, is it possible to cover the scheme? They probably mean the syllabus here, don't they, or the curriculum? Because does it take longer than everything else? What do you think?
Yes, of course, it's possible to cover the scheme. I have done so, and I know inspectors rush in our context to check whether you are where you are supposed to be at a given time within the school year. So there is also this challenge of teachers wanting to cover the scheme. But the question I ask is, which is more important, cover the scheme or get the learners to understand? And I do not feel that using the situational approach to teach grammar is going to take so much time. I teach reported speech in 2 hours, which is the same 2 hours I used to use to teach reported speech because it's quite complex and lengthy. I used to struggle a lot to say, this is how you change pronouns, this is how you change verb tenses, this is how you change adverbials. But now with the situations, they're already able to identify. And of course, when you build the situation, give them written form. So write the structures, write the useful sentences, which you will use, which you will kind of use to illustrate the grammar points, what you want them to take home. So you want them to pay attention to pronoun change, you want them to pay attention to adverbials, but the fact that they're already using them or they already understand how to use them makes it easier. And so I really do not feel, from my experience, that it's going to take longer than necessary.
Yeah, and this is what somebody said in the chat, the learner outcomes are more important than covering the syllabus, which I agree with actually as well. There's a couple more questions, lots of questions coming up. How much time do you allocate to free practice?
Great. So that's quite an interesting question. So generally, I will give preference to freer practice over controlled practice. So I would allocate 5 minutes for controlled practice and more time for freer practice. And then give controlled practice again as take-home assignment. Because at home, my learners will not have the opportunity to interact with anyone. I teach in a rural community, so at home, they really won't find anyone to interact. So I will use 5 minutes, just give them one exercise for control practice, use the remaining time for freer practice, and then give them control practice exercise as take-home assignment. So that helps me to manage the time too.
Great idea. And what is the role of the teacher if this is to be successful?
Okay, Wonderful question. Quite interesting. I'm not sure I have the expertise to answer that, but I'm going to attempt. So I think the role of the teacher is to think creatively, to be able to build the context, because you need to think about the context before you come to class. What situation are you going to use? What pictures will you use? What sketch will you want the learners to perform? So I think that's where the teacher comes in, preparing that context build up. And once you do that, you see that by the time you get into the classroom, it will flow. You see some of the pictures, they were photo created, and I see some of them are my children at home. And some, I even feature in one of the pictures. So I think the teacher needs to think creatively. For this lesson, what context can I use? What real life situation? What pictures can I use to illustrate that situation? That should be the role of the teacher. And then think also about the questions that you use to prompt the learners, because of course they are not going to get it at a go. How will you prompt them, elicit, to push them to get in the structure?
Great answer. You're doing very well with these answers. Well done, Anestin. And there's more questions coming. What about this one? Can this situational approach be used to teach other concepts in other subjects? I'm not sure what the person meant by this. Maybe, I don't know, mathematical concepts?
I'm thinking if the person is a content, is doing content-based instruction, yes. If that's the case, yes, of course. Content-based instruction means that you are actually teaching language in context. So I'm just wondering what the person meant, but I think they could explore and see how they can adapt if possible.
Yeah, I think it's all possible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how do you evaluate students' understanding? I suppose this is more difficult with a big class. How do you know everybody's with you and they all know what you're talking about and what the context is?
Okay, great. So I use more of groups in my classes instead of individuals. So they are kind of fixed groups per month. This is my strategy. I rotate the groups, I change them every month, but I have groups per month. So before I come to class, my learners already know that for the month of May, this is my group and this is my sitting position. It helps us, those of us teaching large classrooms, to be able to manage the classroom. So at the end of the month of May, I will give the sitting arrangement and the groups for the month of June. So they know that beforehand. And I make the groups are mixed, so they are mixed ability groups, so that some are able to help others. And I keep swapping the groups or members within the groups, so that you get new persons, new perspective, new ways of interactions. And I think that's helpful, so that slow learners can benefit from the fast learners. And the fast learners could actually learn more by supporting the slow learners.
That's a great answer, and it leads in well to the next question, which was how do you cater for individual differences? And I think you've answered that one already, that last one, but is group
Yes.
structure. Brilliant. And then what about using videos instead of pictures? Have you tried it using videos?
Yes, I tried using videos in another school, not in the school where this action research was conducted, because it's a rural school. I don't have electricity, so I face my reality. I used pictures. But of course, if you have access to electricity, yes, using videos is very possible. And I've used it in other schools.
Yeah, there's more questions coming in all the time. What title do you give to a grammar lesson when using this approach? Asks Melanie.
Great, wonderful. Actually, it's the same title I'm going to give. The difference is that I don't walk into the classroom and say, today we are going to be doing reported speech. I came out of that. So I get the learners to do the role play, to do the sketch. So I tell them what the sketch is all about, and then I give them the roles, they role play. And at the end, I ask them, what was A doing? They start by saying, oh, he was reporting the incident in class. I say, good. Now, what did B do? Was B reporting? No. Why was A using the words of B? Because B was the person who said the thing. A was just repeating it. So that is reported speech. When you are saying the words of another person, you are reporting them. So, and if you are saying, if you are the author of your own utterances, then we say you are using direct speech because that's your own, those are your own words. And so our lesson will be on reported speech, how to report someone's speech. And so they know there is direct speech because they saw B using direct speech. They said it. They said, and A was reporting B's utterances, so they understand that it's reported speech. That's the difference it makes. Instead of getting into class and saying, today we are going to do direct and reported speech. And then the learners start thinking, what's direct speech? What's reported speech? This lady has come again. It is her English.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question only. The last question then, how do you get all students to participate, especially when you've got like a class of 70, as you said you have sometimes?
Great. Wonderful question. And let's be realistic. Do not expect, I do not expect you to make miracles, and I do not perform any. So you will not get all learners to participate on the same day. Maybe at the beginning, the learners will not participate. They will not be interested. But when you start telling the stories, they get so interested in the story. I remember one day I sent a student out because he was not only was he not willing to participate, he was actually disturbing the others. So I sent him away. I said, okay, just go for break. Now it's break time. When you stay outside for 15 minutes, you can come back. And when he stepped out and I started the story, he came by the window. I was shouting, Madam, please, I want to come to class. I'm interested in that story. He's coming to class because he's interested in the story, not in the lesson. But eventually, the story carries him into the lesson. So they begin to get interested bit by bit. And of course, they might not get interested, all of them at once, but you get others to pull their classmates when you put them in groups.
Great. And everyone's saying in the chat that you're answering the questions so well as well. So very professional. Excellent.